The Continental Navy as a whole is an often overlooked topic. Small, under-equipped, and underfunded, it is usually ignored outside of John Paul Jones. This is a shame, as there are quite a few stories of adventure on the high seas that drift under the metaphorical radar. I have already covered some of those in my video on the first USS Saratoga. For this year's 4th of July, I decided I would cover another, the last ship of the Continental Navy, the frigate USS Alliance. Less famous than her later successor, Constitution, but by no means a failure of a ship. She would, in fact, fire the last shots of the Revolutionary War. That's worth remembering her for, if nothing else. In any case, with that out of the way, let's get into her history now. Laid down in 1777 as a 36-gun sailing frigate, Alliance was originally named Hancock after the rather more famous John Hancock. Had she retained this name, she would have been succeeding one of the first 13 frigates, as the first USS Hancock had been captured by the Royal Navy on July 8, 1777. This would have been a plenty honorable enough name on its own, however, it was not meant to be. With the signing of the Treaty of Alliance with France in 1778, her name would change. While the new frigate was launched on April 28, 1778, under the name Hancock, she would only retain that name for a short time, because on May 29, 1778, she was renamed to USS Alliance. This was by order of the Continental Congress, and in recognition of the importance of the alliance with France. In fact, the first captain of the frigate would be a Frenchman named Pierre Landais. I probably butchered that, but I digress. This man, a former French naval officer, had come to the United States with the hope of being the naval equivalent to Lafayette. Lafayette he was not, though through a charm offensive of incredible effectiveness, he managed to convince Sam Adams to give him command of the Alliance. Arguably the best American ship built during the Revolution. That said, there is some level of irony here. The first mission Alliance undertook was playing transport, as she ferried Lafayette back to France to petition for increased support from the French court. The man who wanted to be Lafayette's naval counterpart had to carry him back to France. Considering the book Give Me a Fast Ship notes the French captain as being a man with a, I quote directly here, rampant ego and neurotic temper, that must have burned. As one could probably expect, the voyage would not be smooth sailing. On the way to France, Landais had to fend off a mutiny. This required the aid of Lafayette to put down, which likely did little to help the captain's mood. Even so, Alliance would successfully reach France on February 6, 1779, capturing 2 prizes along the way. Originally assigned to return home after ferrying Lafayette, the frigate would instead remain in France. Benjamin Franklin stepped in and assigned her to John Paul Jones's squadron. This was a move to give the more famous captain a proper warship, but instead set up a deadly feud between Jones and Landais. Their 2 towering egos clashed repeatedly, from Jones blaming the Frenchman for ramming his ship, to Landais challenging Jones to a duel in a shouting match. It culminated in Alliance often outright ignoring orders, when she was even in company with the squadron. Landais would more often take Alliance off on long solo jaunts, leaving Jones without his most effective ship. And when the famous duel between Bonhomme Richard and Cerberus came about, well, Alliance initially stayed out of it. She watched for 2 hours before Landais decided to jump in, by means of shooting up both combatants. Jones screamed at him to stop and put lanterns up to emphasize the point, but Landais simply fired into both ships once again. Even when his own first officer tried to intervene, the Frenchman snapped back with, "Do you obey my orders? I know very well what to do." Which, in this case, was probably, according to a later conversation with a French colonel, trying to sink Bonhomme Richard so he could claim Serapis for himself. When the battle ended, Alliance provided little aid to the struggling Jones, content to simply watch for the most part once again. Not a great start to her career by any metric, though it can be laid at the feet of her captain more so than her crew. It should be little surprise that, when the squadron limped into safety in the Netherlands, Jones promptly denied Landais' duel and removed him from command of Alliance. As the French captain slunk off to Paris, Jones took command of Alliance, the only ship he would leave Dutch waters with, on December 27, 1779. After sailing to Spain for cleaning and resupply, Jones, with a French frigate in tow, returned to France at the end of January 1780. Upon arrival in late February, Alliance was promptly assigned to carry much-needed cargo to America to supply Washington's army. Whereupon Jones's own ego got in the way, as he acted in his own interests and delayed the voyage for as long as possible. He was in Paris for most of this period, while his ship lingered in port. Eventually, while Jones was off playing political games, Alliance's former captain showed back up. Landais, with the aid of one Arthur Lee, a man who hated Jones and Franklin in equal measure, retook his ship. He promptly took Alliance off to Port Louis, though not much further as French ships blocked any attempt to sail home. Until Jones just told them to let her go and washed his hands of the ship. Either his dislike of Landais stretched to Alliance herself, or he just wanted a more glamorous ship for himself. Regardless, Alliance set sail for American waters, albeit much later than intended. Things would not get better for Alliance, nor her crew, even at this point. Landais would prove to be an even worse captain than he had before, a manic and irresponsible mess. He jailed crew that had come aboard with Jones. He put his Marine captain under lock and key. He almost stabbed Arthur Lee over the first slice of pork at a meal. It eventually reached the point that his crew, at the instigation of Lee himself, mutinied. And this time there was no Lafayette to salvage the mess. On August 11th, the mutiny locked Landais in his cabin, while his first officer took command. Under his much more able leadership, Alliance would sail into Boston Harbor with a much happier crew on August 19th, 1780. Landais would be dragged off the ship and subjected to a court-martial that barred him from ever captaining a ship again. Now in need of a captain, as the first officer was also court-martialed, one John Barry entered the picture. Here was a man who can share Father of the Navy status with Jones and John Adams, an excellent captain by all rights. This should have been a good sign, but the bad luck wasn't quite done with poor Alliance just yet. She languished in port, in disrepair, and with a lack of men to crew her, until January 1781. It was only when she was required to carry an envoy to France once again, this time John Laurens, that funding and men were scrounged up to get her to sea. Now, it's a testament to Barry's skill as a leader that he took this motley crew of British prisoners, castle guards, and invalids, and turned them into something functional, while also keeping Alliance afloat after getting caught in a field of icebergs, which caused some damage to the frigate. After coming through that in one piece, the rest of the voyage would be an overall pleasant one. It seemed like her luck had finally turned for the better. Beneath that exterior, though, simmered discontent. The British crew, with a ringleader in the form of Quartermaster John Crawford, began to plot to kill every officer aboard. They would leave one alive to steer Alliance to Britain, but otherwise they fully intended to kill every other officer. Barry was aware of something going on, and had secured all the weapons while keeping Marines on watchful duty, so nothing came of this plan as she sailed to France. Arriving in France on March 9th, Alliance dropped Lawrence and his companions, including Thomas Paine, off in port. Barry would send letters off to Franklin pleading for repairs for the ship and more American crew, and while Franklin would agree with him, actions speak louder than words. When Alliance left France on March 29th, escorting a French East Indiaman with supplies for Washington's army, it was without either a new copper bottom or new crew. While that was unfortunate, some luck did smile on Captain Barry, as the mutiny plot was uncovered within a day of leaving port. He promptly subdued the men and proceeded on his way. Unfortunately, his charge would end up being captured. The French merchant broke from Alliance during a storm on March 25th and ended up running into a British fleet. Barry sailed home alone, capturing and then losing 2 prizes in early May. The damage from a storm on May 17th practically crippled Alliance, and even after repairs, she was in no state to fight when 2 British sloops of war showed up on May 27th. The following battle saw Alliance pounded heavily as she couldn't bring her guns to bear. It reached the point that, after Barry was wounded and his first officer took over, the ship almost surrendered. Barry was having none of that and put some spine into his fellow officer by saying he would go back up and take command, wound or not. Luckily for Alliance, the wind picked up at that point, and she was able to turn and pound the British into submission, capturing both of the sloops. After repairing the prizes and Alliance herself, the frigate would set sail again, returning to Boston by June 6th. She would be stuck in port waiting for repairs, and funding for those repairs, while the Battle of Yorktown ended the land war. The war at sea would continue, however, for some time yet. Alliance wouldn't rejoin that war until her old friend Lafayette intervened. He chose her to take him home to France, which knocked loose the funding to repair the ship by Christmas Eve, 1781. Her cruise to France would begin at that point, and be a, thankfully, uneventful one. I imagine the crew were quite happy with that, considering how their career had gone thus far. In any case, by January 17, 1782, Alliance was back in France once again. Lafayette disembarked, and Barry set sail again, looking for British shipping to capture. The war may have ended on land, but it remained a going concern at sea, and he hoped to secure the release of American prisoners in exchange for British ones. The rest of 1782 would see Alliance doing such, sailing as far afield as Bermuda, before ending up back in France in October. Barry would take several prizes, though nothing truly noteworthy. Alliance was doing good, reliable service, just nothing that would have books written about her. The same could be said of 1783 in that regard, until March 10th. At that point, carrying gold to deliver to Congress, and escorting another American ship doing much the same, Alliance encountered British warships, including 2 frigates. After a long chase, one of the frigates, HMS Alarm, broke off. The other, HMS Sybil, a 28-gun frigate, closed and fired on the second American ship. Captain Barry promptly took Alliance into the rescue. The 2 ships would engage in nearly an hour of combat, trading broadsides at close range. Eventually, Sybil broke off the engagement, with her captain praising Alliance and her crew. He noted Barry as having every quality of a great commander. As it would turn out, though, this would be the last naval engagement of the Revolutionary War. It would also be the last combat USS Alliance would ever see. The last frigate of the Continental Navy, indeed the last ship left to the Navy at all, was sold off in Philadelphia on August 1st, 1785, as the new nation could not afford any navy. A shame, considering that Alliance was still a capable and modern warship. Instead, Alliance would spend some time in merchant service, before eventually ending up on Petty's Island, where she would rot away in peace, with some of her timbers visible all the way to the dawn of the 20th century. A sad fate for an admittedly unlucky ship, but then, how unlucky was she, really? After all, in spite of all the mishaps, in spite of her terrible initial captain, Alliance survived the war intact. She fired the final shots of the Revolutionary War, even if it was technically after the war had already ended. That matters more than anything else for USS Alliance, I think. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you in the next one.